Canada has formally announced support for Iran against the United States, delivering one of the most dramatic shocks to the Western alliance structure in modern history. Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped before Parliament and declared that recent U.S. military actions against Iran were not valid under international law, and that Canada would provide defensive weapon systems and structured financial assistance to Tehran. In a single statement, Ottawa shifted the geopolitical landscape, placing President Donald Trump under extraordinary political, diplomatic, and economic pressure. Carney's announcement was direct and unapologetic. Canada, he said, would supply advanced radar systems, anti-drone platforms, electronic defense infrastructure, and cyber defense technology designed to protect Iranian civilian and critical infrastructure from further attacks. In addition, Ottawa would extend a multi-billion-dollar stabilization package structured as financial aid aimed at reconstruction and humanitarian resilience. The message was clear: Canada would not stand silent in the face of what it viewed as unilateral escalation. Before we break down how this unprecedented move is reshaping global alliances, shaking markets, dividing NATO, and placing President Trump in one of the most difficult positions of his presidency, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These deep geopolitical breakdowns explore how power shifts at the highest levels can redefine the global order, and you won't want to miss what happens next in this unfolding scenario. The reaction from Washington was immediate and intense. President Trump addressed the nation within hours, describing Canada's move as a serious and deeply disappointing action from a country that has long been one of our closest partners. Behind the scenes, emergency meetings were convened in the White House Situation Room. Defense officials, intelligence chiefs, and senior economic advisors gathered to evaluate the implications of a NATO ally openly supporting a state engaged in direct confrontation with the United States. At the Pentagon, military planners assessed how Canadian defensive systems could alter operational dynamics in the region. Even though Ottawa framed the equipment as purely defensive, advanced radar and anti-drone systems could complicate air operations, electronic warfare planning, and surveillance missions. The strategic ambiguity created new uncertainty. Defensive support in this context had consequences that extended well beyond humanitarian framing. Inside Congress, pressure mounted rapidly. Lawmakers demanded clarity. Some called for economic countermeasures against Canada. Others warned that retaliatory action could fracture North American stability at a time when unity was critical. Bipartisan hearings were proposed to examine the legal and security implications of Canada's decision. Meanwhile, NATO headquarters entered crisis mode. Emergency consultations were triggered under alliance procedures. The foundation of NATO relies on cohesion and shared strategic direction. Canada's divergence created an unprecedented fault line. European allies were suddenly forced into a delicate balancing act: publicly defend alliance unity while privately confronting the reality of open disagreement between two cornerstone members. Several European leaders issued cautious statements emphasizing restraint and dialogue. Privately, divisions emerged. Some governments quietly sympathized with Canada's emphasis on international law and proportionality. Others feared that visible cracks in NATO could embolden rival powers and weaken deterrence globally. Financial markets reacted with volatility. The Canadian dollar fluctuated sharply as investors weighed potential U.S. trade retaliation. U.S. defense stocks surged on expectations of prolonged instability. Oil prices climbed amid speculation that diplomatic fractures could spill into broader regional disruption. The economic stakes were enormous. The United States and Canada share one of the largest bilateral trade relationships in the world. Cross-border supply chains in automotive manufacturing, agriculture, energy, and technology are deeply integrated. Any escalation into trade retaliation risked significant economic fallout on both sides of the border. Trump now faced a multidimensional crisis. Domestically, critics argued that his foreign policy approach had alienated close allies. Supporters demanded strength, insisting that failure to respond decisively would undermine American credibility. The political landscape became increasingly polarized. At the same time, Mark Carney stood firm. In a follow-up address, he emphasized that Canada's support was not ideological alignment with Iran, but a principled stance against unilateral escalation. He framed the move as a stabilizing action designed to deter further expansion of conflict. Defensive support, he reiterated, is not aggression. In Tehran, officials welcomed the development as a diplomatic breakthrough. The announcement was portrayed as evidence that Western unity against Iran was weakening. Iranian leadership emphasized the defensive nature of the systems, positioning the support as validation of their narrative that external aggression required international pushback. Energy markets continued to fluctuate as analysts attempted to forecast second-order effects. If Washington imposed economic penalties on Ottawa, energy flows across North America could be disrupted. If tensions escalated within NATO, investor confidence could deteriorate across global markets. Within NATO's military command structure, operational coordination faced new sensitivities. Joint exercises, intelligence sharing protocols, and strategic planning discussions required recalibration. While no formal rupture occurred, the psychological shift was undeniable. Trust had been strained. The White House weighed several response options: economic tariffs on select Canadian goods, targeted restrictions on defense cooperation, diplomatic engagement to de-escalate rhetoric. Each option carried risks. A forceful response might restore deterrence optics but damage economic stability. A restrained response might preserve trade flows but appear weak. Trump's advisors debated intensely. Hardline voices argued that allowing a NATO member to materially assist an opposing state would set a dangerous precedent. Moderates warned that pushing Canada too far could drive further divergence and encourage other allies to question U.S. leadership. Public opinion surveys reflected growing division. In Canada, supporters praised Carney's independence. Critics warned of jeopardizing the country's most important alliance. In the United States, voters split along partisan lines regarding how aggressively to respond. The economic dimension deepened. Analysts warned that even symbolic tariffs could disrupt billions in annual trade. Supply chains already strained by global uncertainty could face new bottlenecks. Financial institutions adjusted risk models to account for prolonged diplomatic tension. Meanwhile, European capitals intensified quiet diplomacy. Back-channel conversations sought to prevent public escalation. Leaders emphasized that preserving alliance cohesion required dialogue rather than confrontation. China and other major powers observed closely. Strategic analysts in Beijing and Moscow evaluated whether NATO fragmentation presented opportunities in other theaters. The optics of Allied disagreement reverberated far beyond the immediate crisis. Trump's political calculus grew more complex. With elections approaching, opponents framed the situation as evidence of declining American influence. Supporters emphasized the need to project unwavering strength. Carney's gamble was equally high stakes. By stepping into the conflict narrative, Canada elevated its global profile but exposed itself to potential economic retaliation. The decision redefined Canada's strategic identity from quiet ally to assertive actor. Energy traders continued to monitor developments. If alliance tensions triggered additional instability in shipping lanes or regional operations, oil and gas prices could surge further. The interconnectedness of geopolitics and markets became starkly visible. Within the Pentagon, scenario planning expanded. Contingencies accounted for potential Iranian deployment of Canadian-supplied defensive systems. Operational strategies adjusted accordingly. Diplomats on both sides recognized the gravity of the moment. North American security architecture had been built over decades of trust and cooperation. Allowing a policy disagreement to escalate into structural rupture would carry long-term consequences. As days passed, rhetoric moderated slightly. Trump emphasized that dialogue remained possible. Carney reiterated Canada's commitment to alliance frameworks while defending its independent stance. Behind closed doors, emergency diplomatic channels continued to operate. Senior officials from both governments held quiet discussions aimed at preventing a full breakdown in relations. Trade negotiators, military officers, and intelligence leaders worked simultaneously to ensure that tensions did not spiral beyond control. Yet uncertainty continued to dominate global headlines. Analysts debated whether this crisis represented a temporary dispute or the beginning of a deeper realignment within Western alliances. The core tension remained unresolved. Can an alliance withstand fundamental disagreement over war? This unfolding scenario reveals how quickly global power structures can shift when close partners diverge on critical issues. It underscores the fragility of consensus and the high stakes of leadership decisions during crisis. For President Trump, the pressure is immense, political, economic, and strategic. For Prime Minister Carney, the risks are equally profound. The world watches as two longtime allies navigate one of the most dramatic divergences in modern history. The outcome will determine not only the trajectory of their relationship, but the resilience of alliance systems across the globe. Stay tuned for further deep geopolitical analysis, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow every major shift in global power dynamics